Top of the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Ukraine says it shot down 36 of 36 drones in overnight Russian attack. Leader of cross-border raid warns Russia his group will launch more attacks into Russian territory. Plus, NATO chief John Stoltenberg says Ukraine will not be able to join NATO as long as the war is going on. Thank you so much for joining us. Ukraine's Air Force says that Russia launched 36 Iranian-made Shahed drones against Ukraine overnight. Now, all the drones were reportedly shot down by the Ukrainian military. The Air Force says Russian troops likely aimed to strike critical infrastructure and military facilities in Ukraine's western regions. However, it didn't mention if any of those facilities were damaged. Ukraine's Southern Command reported destroying 3 drones over the Mykolaiv Oblast and 1 over Odessa Oblast, but there were no hits in the regions. 1 more drone was shot down over the western Chernivtsi Oblast. That's according to the regional governor, adding that the details of that overnight attack will follow. Earlier, Kiev City Military Administration head Serhiy Popko said that Russian forces had targeted the Ukrainian capital for the 12th time in May. The Russian commander of a militia that conducted a raid on a Russian border region this week said his group will soon launch more incursions into Russian territory. The leader, who described himself as the commander of the Russian Volunteer Corps, Denis Kapustin, spoke to reporters on the Ukrainian side of the border with Russia a day after Moscow said it had repelled the raid on the Belgorod region. Kyiv has said the attack was carried out by Russian citizens, casting it as homegrown, internal Russian strife. 2 groups operating in Ukraine, the Russian Volunteer Corps, RVC, and the Freedom of Russia Legion, have claimed responsibility. Kapustin said 2 of his fighters had been lightly wounded, and that total losses on his side of the operation were 2 killed and 10 wounded. Kapustin also said the fighters had taken a Russian armored vehicle, an anti-drone gun, as trophies.
This is how I should put it, to be honest. It definitely has various phases. So phase 1, we consider.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin said that the use of Western-made military hardware by pro-Ukrainian fighters who conducted the raid on a Russian border region this week was consistent with the West's growing involvement in the Ukraine conflict. The Russian military said it had routed militants who attacked the Russian border region of Belgorod with armored vehicles the previous day, killing more than 70 Ukrainian nationalists and pushing the remainder back into Ukraine. Images of some of the destroyed vehicles used by the pro-Ukrainian fighters broadcast on Russian state media showed US-made military hardware such as US-made Humvees. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters in his words, "It is no secret for us that more and more equipment is being delivered to Ukraine's armed forces. It is no secret that the equipment is being used against our own military. And it is no secret for us that the direct and indirect involvement of Western countries in this conflict is growing by the day." Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says supplying F-16 fighter aircraft to Ukraine will be a signal that Russia will lose over its aggression, and the faster a decision is implemented on the planes, the better. Mr. Zelensky said in his nightly video address, the very first Ukrainian F-16 will be one of the strongest signals from the world that Russia will only lose because of its aggression. It will be weaker and further isolated. He adds, the main thing is the speed in training and supply, meaning the time between decisions and real protection for our skies. President Zelensky also used the video address to direct a message towards the people of Iran regarding Russia's use of Iranian-made weapons, including drones. Meanwhile, Dutch Defense Minister Katse Ollongren, in a letter to Parliament that the Netherlands wants to give Ukrainian pilots F-16 training as soon as possible, was made public. He added that the training will be coordinated with Belgium, Denmark, and the UK, and other countries could join in. Now, earlier, NATO's chief John Stoltenberg said training Ukrainian pilots on Western F-16 fighter jets will not make NATO a party in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Norway has also said it will support efforts to teach Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 fighter jets a day earlier. Senior Russian diplomat says the transfer of F-16 jets to Ukraine will raise the question of NATO's role in the conflict. However, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that any U.S.-built F-16 fighter jets that were supplied to Ukraine will be a legitimate target for Moscow. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that energy prices were approaching economically justified levels and that Russia was continuing to meet its commitment on energy supplies. Speaking at a forum of the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Forum, or Union, in Moscow, President Putin also raised the issue of energy shortages in Europe. Speaking in front of the leaders of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, Mr. Putin said in his words, they blew up Nord Stream 1 and didn't start Nord Stream 2, referring to the twin gas pipelines from Russia across the Baltic Sea to Germany that was severely damaged by explosions last September. Russia, without providing evidence, has repeatedly said the West was behind the blasts. Investigators from Sweden and Denmark, in whose exclusive economic zones the explosions occurred, have said the ruptures were a result of sabotage, but have not said who they believe was responsible. U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said the United States is deeply concerned by a meeting between leading United Nations officials for children and Russia's Ombudsman for Children's Rights, who is wanted by the World Permanent War Crimes Court. It comes as Maria Lvova-Belova, who is accused by the International Criminal Court prosecutor of the war crime of deporting hundreds of Ukrainian children to Russia, said on her website last week that she held a working meeting with Virginia Gamba, that's the special representative of the UN Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because yesterday when you asked me, we had seen the reports of the meeting. We had not yet confirmed it ourselves. We have now confirmed that meeting in the last 24 hours, and I will say that we are deeply concerned that a senior UN diplomat met with a fugitive subject to an ICC arrest warrant for committing war crimes against children. Such conduct undermines our shared commitment to protecting children in conflict zones. As we have said before, and Alex, this goes to, I think, the broader question you were going to ask, Russia is forcibly deporting children from Ukraine. They're denying parents and legal guardians access to those children, giving away children giving children from Ukraine Russian passports in an attempt to take away a part of their identity. Children are among the most vulnerable groups. They must be protected, especially in times of war, and we continue to call for accountability for war crimes.
Now we're pleased to speak with international affairs analyst, Mr. Yinkao Unity, who joins us from the East Midlands in the UK. You're welcome to the program this morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Matthew Miller's accusations or allegations are very grave. If it's true that these children are being taken from their guardians and they're being transported across the border, then it's a very obvious situation. But Russia has denied it. What is your position on this issue? Because we know that children are very impressionable. But however, was also reported that these children were taken to recreation centers and some of them to sanatoriums. And Russia has totally flatly denied that this situation is occurring. What's your view?
All right, I think that it may not be fair to go ahead in a frontal attack to establish that Russia is indeed guilty of these heinous crimes. it would have to be investigated. And that is why we need international agencies to step in, humanitarian development agencies to step in and investigate if there is any truth in this recent allegation. It's not the first war crime that Russia has committed, and having been established since this invasion over a year ago. So to stand at any point to allude or make assertions without backing them with evidence may be really horrendous. But of course, it is a heinous crime. If it is established that this has been done, it just adds to the growing list of the charges against Putin by the International Criminal Court. So first thing we're required to do is allow international agencies, relief organizations, step in, investigate, and establish that this is indeed the case. And if it is, then the charges just keep piling up against Putin.
We understand some of these children are orphans. What possible use could the Russians have for this particular measure? Because those places where they're being deported from, as they say, are Russian-held territories.
There are actually at least two. We must be very clear. Channels Television and myself are not saying that this is verified news or that it has been asserted that this has happened. But in the circumstances, if there's any truth, if there's any veracity in this scenario, then it must be at least two things. Number one, these children are going to be conscripted into the army. We already know that Russia has lost many foot soldiers. On that front, Russia has lost the war on ground, okay? So it doesn't have any soldiers anymore. They place heavy reliance on Wagner troops who will win in this war regardless. And Wagner troops cannot be trusted as far as Putin is concerned. So these children may be conscripted into becoming emergency soldiers. And then secondly, they may also become soft targets. It's like international terrorism, where Russia now surrounds itself with innocent children. And then, of course, I'm talking about Russian soldiers in those territories which are claimed have been taken by Russia, so that it may be difficult for Ukraine or indeed NATO countries to join in the fight against those Russian soldiers on the ground. Like I told you a few weeks ago, the war has moved beyond infantry on the ground to the air. So it may be difficult, okay, for those F-16s or drones to be able to be deployed by Ukraine when you know that there are soft targets, innocent children surrounding Russian invaders.
I'm sure many will beg to differ that Russia will stoop so low as to use children as shields or conscript them as soldiers, that it hasn't gotten that bad. But let's swift focus to the incursion into Belgorod and this admission by these two individuals of these two organizations, if we can call them that now, that they have taken responsibility for this action and that they are spearheading a new wave, as they've said and insinuated, of resistance against Russia by threatening that they will do it again. Now,
so
this...
Go on.
Yeah, so to which Ukraine have said that earlier they denied and said they had nothing to do with it, but by the admission of those two individuals of the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russian Legion, that they got help from Ukraine. Speaking to a Saudi-based, to a Middle East-based news agency, one of them said that Ukraine was helping. The other said that Ukraine was not helping, but was helping with information or intelligence. Now, Ukraine has been caught in a lie because these people have said that Ukraine is helping them. What dimension does this add to the conflict?
So, again, the war is lost already. I think that we have to be truthful with ourselves. And then it's not going according to plan. It was started by Russia. It was started many years ago. But this present incursion was activated February last year. Now, if you consider from February till now, there are some sticky points, okay, that have happened. Okay, we had the Nord Stream gas turbine blown up. Okay, that was when we should have started to realize that Russia had lost the plot. So what you see now is on the ground, Russia has lost. Economically, Russia has lost. With respect to support from the international scene, Russia has lost. Only China is publicly standing with Russia. Even you don't hear anything from Belarus anymore. Those other countries who hitherto before now were standing in the corner for Russia, including Brazil. So we have now moved towards what other tools of war, dirty tools, if you like, can be used. And then Putin escalated to war crimes. At this point, any third party who's likely to benefit from Ukraine standing firm will always allude their success to Ukraine, even when Ukraine has nothing to do about it. So there are third parties who are standing firm, who by themselves would support Ukraine if they could publicly. But at this point, because Ukraine is standing firm, whatever grounds they have with Russia, they would simply allude to Ukraine. And it is the same thing for Russia. Russia alleging that it was UK, US supporting Ukraine to blow up that gas supplies for the rest of the world. But that was Putin having no other alternatives. And that is where we need to stand at this time. It will be propaganda going forward, propaganda and blackmail. So the rest of the world needs to be alert to all of these possibilities. Third parties who cannot ordinarily stand up to Russia, but are overjoyed that Ukraine is taking the first step, would want to take benefit of a situation for which Ukraine has absolutely no knowledge.
Let's look at the timeline of the incursion. Bakhmut is happening. Wagner is complaining. The conflict in Bakhmut, the battle for that region, is extending into months, the bloodiest so far, as we have been reporting. Then Ukraine have said that they're holding Bakhmut, they're holding the supply lines, and that situation at worst was a stalemate. But just a few days ago, Russia claimed control of Bakhmut. Ukraine conceded that Russia is controlling Bakhmut, but yet they hold on to a little stronghold or fortress in that area. Immediately after that, with Putin congratulating his Wagner mercenary forces, this incursion happens. It smacks of a reprisal, it smacks of a knee-jerk, or it could be a premeditated measure taken by this group who say they don't have direct support from Ukraine. So if Russia is losing, as you have said in your opinion, that Russia has indeed lost the war, how come they didn't lose in Bakhmut? So with all the problems that Prigozhin said he had with the supplies, he said over 20,000 mercenary soldiers were lost in that conflict.
The Bakhmut scenario is overrated, and is what it is. I took my time to investigate last week the essence of each party leading claim to, taking over Bakhmut. It's overrated. Now, there's no doubt that Russia has lost men and weapons. So, Bakhmut has held firm for at least 2 to 3 months. We've been talking about a counteroffensive all of that time, and the war in Bakhmut had been going on all of that time. Russia wasn't able to move any step further. In fact, Russia had to retreat 2 kilometers, at least 2 kilometers back, from Bakhmut. At this moment, if Russia knows what they are doing, they are walking into a trap because F-16s have arrived, That means area bombardments would increase from just using drones. And they are sitting dogs, they are lame dogs that are going to be taken off. So Russia is walking into a trap. However, Wagner cannot be trusted, even by Russia itself. Because again, I just read that Wagner troops are sounding the alarm that a revolution may happen in Russia. Now, Wagner is looking to take advantage of the situation. Remember, it was the same Wagner troops who last week said that Ukraine was right to say that Ukraine was standing firm in Bakhmut, and Wagner troops were actually applauding Ukraine. It is also not in doubt that some Russian soldiers and Wagner troops have started to cross and submit their allegiance to Ukraine. So Wagner troops are no longer fighting for Russia. And if it's Wagner saying that they've taken over Bakhmut, Wagner can as well turn back and start to lead discussions with Ukraine to say, on behalf of the Russian government or the Russian people, we are tired of fighting a war. The only person who will lose in this war is Putin, because he cannot trust Wagner troops. Wagner troops are fighting for themselves to gain some legitimacy, even in government, control of the government in Russia. And Ukraine by itself has the support of the rest of the world. So how is Bakhmut relevant? Bakhmut is not relevant. In fact, give it a few more days, you will hear the true story. It's either Wagner troops start to say, you know what, we think that they come even bolder in attacking Putin, which they've been doing since all over the weekend. They've been accusing the defense minister of lacking any strategy. They've been accusing Russian government of lacking ammunition. They've been accusing the Russian government of losing so many soldiers. So how can we then trust Wagner troops to say that they've taken control of Bakhmut? Regardless, Ukraine is marching on and is getting cache of ammunition and assault weapons all over the world.
You raise a number of issues there concerning, well, firstly, the F-16s have not arrived, so I'd like to correct you on that. But concerning that, they have not arrived, they're still expecting them, and then the whole training program and the whole measure to which President Zelensky has said that that will be the game changer for them, and that will mean that Russia, the aggressor, in his words, have lost the war. But any territory in Ukraine is fair game for Russia because of their intentions. However, he also said that that Bakhmut is not relevant. Since it's Ukrainian territory, doesn't it make it relevant? When you say it's not relevant, what do you mean exactly? Because it was a very vibrant town, and there were people there, and it's been razed to the ground. So whether or not it's a strategic geographical location like Kyiv, it's still Ukrainian territory.
All right, so let me start with your own correction to say F-16s had not arrived. Once F-16s were approved last week, they are deemed to have arrived. Are you really telling me that you expect that the F-16s will be physically located in Ukraine? Are you telling me that they cannot take off from any NATO territory outside of Ukraine? Do you really think that Ukraine intends to launch F-16s from its own geographical territory right there in Kyiv? These answers are a no, because once you have F-16s and you have NATO, then it means that from any of these territories they can take off. Don't expect Zelensky to stand in Kyiv and say, welcome F-16s. As long as they have been approved, the deployment of US F-16s is done. It is done because it's pivotal in this war. It is the game changer, no doubt. Where we could have actually questioned whether they had been, they were going to be deployed or not was when they were being approved. It was, I mean, nobody expected that. These are not domestic flights. These are long-range military carriers that can be launched anywhere. In fact, the question was, are we sure that Zelensky will limit the attack from F-16s to Ukraine? Because right there, from Ukraine, you can target China, you can target Russia. Okay, so that is the question. As far as that question is concerned on the international scene, it is mute. It's been approved. And I won't say that we'll wait until we welcome them into Kyiv to say that they can be ready to be launched. That's on one hand. On the other hand, what is the population in Bakhmut? Okay, we are talking about major cities. Russia didn't start to annex today, started from Crimea. And you'll be asking, what's the relevance of Crimea? Okay, the same thing with Bakhmut. It's now about a losing fight. It's pride, absolutely nothing else but pride. We're talking about nuclear stations that have been taken over before now. Is Bakhmut more relevant than nuclear stations? So we can't, it's just a thing of pride. It doesn't even have anything to do with advancement or repression in terms of ground attack, because now we have warplanes coming in. So it's not about the location anymore. Even if, just as they've stated that they've taken Bakhmut, then what? What casualty has Ukraine suffered? They've taken over Bakhmut, okay? Where are the people in Bakhmut welcoming Russian soldiers? So it's pride. It's the limits that Russian soldiers can go on the land.
The people in Bakhmut, most of them who weren't killed, have evacuated while this conflict was going on and before it escalated to the point of the complete destruction. But I wish we had more time so we could talk a little further. But also to pick up on something else you said, it's highly unlikely that F-16 fighter jets will be launched from any other country but Ukraine, especially NATO, without involving those countries as aiding and abetting the war. But we will leave it to another time. And I thank you for being with us this morning, Mr. Yinkao Unity, International Affairs Analyst, who joined us from East Midlands in the UK. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I look forward to those conversations.
After the break. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba urges African countries to abandon their stances of neutrality towards Ukraine's war with Russia. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has urged African countries to abandon their stances of neutrality towards Ukraine's war with Russia. Speaking in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, Mr. Kuleba says Ukraine was very upset that some African countries chose to abstain and called them to lend Ukraine diplomatic support in the face of Russian aggression. He said neutrality is not the answer. By being neutral towards Russian aggression against Ukraine, you project neutrality to the violations of borders and mass crime that may occur very close to you. Russia has built a substantial presence in several parts of Africa, where Russian private military contractor Wagner is active, and recently held joint military drills with South Africa. Russia plans to hold an Africa-Russia summit in July. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg says Ukraine will not be able to join NATO as long as the war is going on. He said the military alliance's priority was to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. If discussions on membership are not yet on the agenda, Mr. Stoltenberg says the alliance's next summit in Vilnius will focus on discussions on cooperation on increasing the interoperability of weapons and systems between Ukraine and NATO.
We all agree that NATO's door is open for new members, and that it is for the NATO allies and Ukraine to decide when they should join, not Moscow. They don't have a veto. And then we also agree that the most urgent and important task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. Because if Ukraine doesn't prevail, then there's no membership issue to discuss. But what we will do most likely is that we'll agree at least this program of making Ukraine even coming more closer to NATO and more interoperable with NATO.
Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping, in meeting with visiting Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin in Beijing, called for pushing pragmatic cooperation and people-to-people exchanges between China and Russia to a higher level through concerted efforts on both sides. Xi expressed his hope that both sides will continue to take advantage of the great potential, broad prospects, and strong impetus of China-Russia ties to advance pragmatic cooperation. He says, quote, "I'm very pleased to meet Prime Minister Mishustin once again. Please convey my sincere greetings and best wishes to my old friend, President Putin. This marks your first visit to China after you assumed office as Prime Minister. I'm looking forward to seeing that both sides will continue to leverage advantages of bilateral cooperation featuring great potential, broad prospects, and strong impetus so as to push the pragmatic cooperation and people-to-people exchanges between the two countries to a higher level." Mishustin is on a two-day official visit to China at the invitation of the Chinese Premier Li Qiang. Meanwhile, the Chinese Premier held talks with visiting Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin in Beijing, calling for expanding bilateral cooperation in various fields. The talks come after Li held a welcome ceremony outside the Great Hall of the People. Li said the comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination between China and Russia for a new era has maintained high-level development in recent years under the strategic leadership of President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin. The Chinese premier pointed out that the practical cooperation between the two countries enjoys strong resilience, great potential, and broad space. Li said China is ready to work with Russia to optimize trade structure, further enrich categories of trade, and expand cooperation in agriculture, trade in services, digital economy, and other fields. We're happy to speak with Mr. Ralph Obasijay, public affairs analyst, joining us from Lekki in Lagos, Southwest Nigeria, Nigeria's commercial capital. It's good to have you on the program this morning.
I'm in London.
You're in London? Oh, beg your pardon.
Yes, I'm joining
You're
from
welcome.
London.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. UK capital. Good to have you on the show from there. Now, let's begin with this. You're welcome. Let's begin with this. It's really, now, Xi Jinping and China have stepped up to the plate and have gone as far as to have a phone call with President Zelensky. Not only that, the Chinese envoy is visiting both areas for the peace mediation efforts sponsored or propounded by China. Now, this meeting between China and Russia seems to, what sort of message does this send? Because they are waving it in the faces of people that they're a very strong alliance. Regardless of what is happening with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, China seems to be sending a message to the rest of the world that we are standing with Russia. What does this say to you?
China has been very unequivocal, and fortunately, it's not a country that the US can toy with. They have similar issues with some territories they've not claimed back, like Taiwan. The issues that are on ground between Ukraine and Russia is the issue almost similar with the issues that are on ground between the US and China over Taiwan. And the US are trying not to provoke China. But this rapprochement that has come up is a welcome development. After threats from Uncle Sam and bullying of China and Russia, when they saw the changing game on the battlefronts, you then had frantic talks from both the European Union, the NATO leaders, and the US, telling China, sorry, Russia is your friend and we can leverage on that friendship. Tell Russia to stop the war. Tell Russia to stop the war. You don't dictate, in such a situation, you don't dictate a solution. So you saw that the European President, Van der Leyen, visited Beijing about the same time that the German Chancellor also visited Beijing, and they went to urge Xi Jinping and the Premier to prevail on Russia to stop the war. Now, when the situation is there, the first thing you want to achieve is a ceasefire. So these visits that you have just mentioned to both Kyiv and Moscow by the Russian Foreign Minister and the Premier is welcome. Let us hope that it will yield the desired results. If there is sincerity, because the West is always double speaking. There's always this conspiracy theory. Somebody was asking me at Ikoyi Club last time, what is my interest in this? I said, I don't have the interest. It is just that the US is not relenting in its effort to achieve a unimodal world where it can do anything without being challenged. They call the invasion of Ukraine illegal invasion. And the US has forgotten that it goes and destabilizes countries at will, especially after the demise of the Soviet Union. But it is not only the Chinese intervention that is encouraging now. I think about this week or weekend or so, 5 African heads of state, led by Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, are also going to visit Kyiv and Moscow. And this makes some of us who are students of history to remember the detente and buffer activities that was brought about by the defunct non-aligned movement. And non-aligned movements had very vibrant leadership under the late Joseph Broz Tito of Yugoslavia and Indira Gandhi of India. And they had a voice made up of about 78 member countries that decided not to be aligned to either the West or the communist bloc during the Cold War, they were able to raise their voices to say, hey, this is a thing, the world is sitting on the tinderbox. Russia and US don't obliterate life on Earth. And that was what encouraged these countries to start their start 1, start 2, and SALT 1 and SALT 2 talks to try and reduce nuclear warheads and make sure that there's no war. Now, with these things happening, I am sure since America did backslide and did not dismantle NATO the way the Soviet Union dismantled the Warsaw Pact, it was the demise of the Soviet Union that made the non-aligned movement to just fizzle out of or become moribund. So what is happening now is that I think with the reality on the ground, I can foresee realignment of forces. Somebody says the Cold War has ended. It has not ended. It has simply been resuscitated. Maybe a group now will come up again. From nowhere, somebody will just say, look, we didn't liquidate non-aligned movement. Let us start our meetings again.
Now,
to
jump in, does this consolidate Russia's relationship with China, likening this to a school ecosystem, or maybe in the university or college or high school, where there are in the entire gamut, there are students who are popular for academic reasons, there are students who are popular for social reasons, then there are the ones who are just different. They're on the side, they choose to be different. And because they're different, they're not different for the sake of being different, they choose to be different because that's what they want. Do you see this situation with Russia and China as rubbing their relationship in the faces of the West? Because there was no talk, and there is no talk, of what's happening in Ukraine in this visit to China.
Yes, this visit to China is basically for economic reasons. That cooperation has been there. They've been exchanging students. Moscow funds some scholarships, not only in China, even in Russia, when the Chinese government sends students all over the world. Most Chinese students are on double scholarship. You go to universities like Patrice Lumumba Friendship University in Leningrad or so, you'll find that Russia is still right from time. Even African students, they still subsidize the education of students in a few of their universities. So this is not a new thing, but don't lose sight of the changing generational high. Somebody was saying yesterday, could it be Generation Z or Generation Z plus? It's don't put any alphabet to it again. The shift of the world and the way the young look at life, the outlook to life of young students is different from you and I. We are already becoming ostriches, you know. The way they want their things done. You now have a very informed youth all over the world, youths that question their government. But they're also taking, people are wondering why they call Putin a dictator. Russia is so big, people are wondering why. Interview 10 Russians, 7 of them are aligning behind Putin in his efforts in this war. I was looking at the insurgency that, the West does so many things in many ways. There's no gainsaying that the suspicion that insurgency in the Southeast that just happened was sponsored as a distraction to make Russia to start fighting in many fronts. But I think people forget how Putin, which is what made him, why he's popular in Russia, how he came in and quickly stamped out the rebellions in Dagestan and Chechnya. Dudayev then was also schooled in the West, and he came in, he led the rebellion to try to make Chechnya independent with all the gas and oil reserves that were there. But Putin stamped it out in 8 months. And I know that he has that experience to rely on to deal. And you saw last night where Russia claimed that they have annihilated the insurgents. So I was expecting the Western press to bring the same commander of the insurgents that spoke 2 days ago to show him again on telly to say, I'm alive. I've not seen it since yesterday. So that is where you will know where the truth lies.
You know, it's not a popular war. It's a war that has had the world taking sides. So you can expect a media narrative in certain quarters to be sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause. That is to be expected. But as we look at neutrality and the criticism of the Ukrainian envoy of some African nations on their seeming neutrality in this issue, do you think he has a point?
I was just going to tell you that when you say they have supporters and sympathizers, what are the sympathizers? The sympathizers are the Western bloc led by the US, because you ask yourself, why would NATO and the US, knowing that the Ukraine cannot stand up to Russia as a next-door neighbor, their own countries are safe, but they are pumping weapons into Ukraine, and Ukraine, you saw the comment of Blinken on the success of the Wagner mercenaries in Bakhmut, and he says, why are they saying they've won the war in Bakhmut? What are you going to gain from a destroyed city? Have you seen the videos of Bakhmut? Bakhmut is destroyed. Nothing there is living. Why the West will not go to the, how will I call it, via the route of dialogue and settlement? You see, when you go back to the Minsk II agreement that America has refused to be implemented, that is where the solution lies. People should not lose sight of the immediate and remote causes of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Like I told, I appeared on this channel about 3 weeks ago, and I mentioned it briefly. Now, when you look at the remote and immediate causes, when Gorbachev, whom I still suspect not to be an authentic Russian, when he did his program of glasnost and perestroika, he destroyed the USS Arrow. All right? Okay. Now, with that sudden demise of the USS Arrow, a lot of strategic technological advancements they've made and equipment were lying in places like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine was a production hub. That is why the Volgograd, the steel complex in Ukraine that Russia is occupying, was very important because missile shells were being produced here. It had its own jetty. It's so large. It has underground accommodation in case of nuclear attack. That was where they were manufacturing half of their warheads from. The rest were in Belarus. Today, Belarus can supply you tractors, vehicles, because the manufacturing hub is still there. The space center, which has become the world space center, which is the best in the world, is still lying in pieces in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And today, if anybody is going to take over those space centers from Russia, Russia will invade. It's in the agreement it signed with those countries. So the same thing with Ukraine. Ukraine is strategic, as a strategic neighbor to Russia. But the US sponsored a coup, as admitted by them, as admitted by the Secretary of State then, a lady, to the Congress, that they've succeeded in changing the regime in Ukraine. And they put Zelensky, who grew up in the US, who schooled in the US, and they planted him there.
I see
just
your
to
point.
make sure he confronts.
I see your point. We're just going to have to let you go for reasons of time, but I see your point and where you're going with this. So one has to take also into cognizance Russia's position on the peace plan and whether or not you think that the peace plan of President Zelensky is something that the Russians will accede to, knowing that the bone of contention, many of them have set a total different divide between both countries. But we'll leave it there. We'll leave it there because of NATO.
Okay, but let me just quickly say. We don't
have time. We're going to have to just let you go. But we thank you so much for your contribution.
You have ethnic Russians in those territories. What is Russia going to do with them?
Understood.
Yes, so
thank you so much for being a part of the program this morning. Appreciate it, Mr. Ralph Obasijay, public affairs analyst, who joined us from London. Coming up, world's biggest aircraft carrier sails into Norway for NATO exercises. Details in a moment. Please stay with us.
living together in one community, working together in the same trade. We go into their midst, find out how they live and work.
Oh my goodness, food business is not an easy business.
I spent more than 35 years for this community.
We tell these stories and how they survive in this economy. Community Report, we tell your story.
Stay connected to the world with Channels TV Podcast and get all the trending stories. Simply log on to channelstv.com, click on podcast, select the program of your choice, and listen. Our podcast is available on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Tap the expertise you trust. Touch the stories that touch you. Anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now we'll bring you the business dimension of how the conflict is affecting the business world all over the world. And we have Laddie Williams, my colleague from the business sector.
Exactly. Good morning.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
CBN Monetary Policy Committee raises lending rates by 50 basis points.
Yeah.
How is that affected by the conflict? And
yeah, so that was the final meeting for the Buhari-led administration yesterday, and obviously we've known the battle against inflation since 2022. Most economies have been, trying to rein in inflation ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. We saw energy prices skyrocket. Major commodities that the world relies on, all of that, went up in price immediately. Russia invaded Ukraine, and we've seen, the impact on inflation so far. And we've seen central bankers globally, try to fight inflation. So right here, this is the 12th time we've been raising rates since inflation started being a problem right here in Nigeria. We've had like 12 months of raises from about 11.5%. That's when the cycle started here in Nigeria. Okay. And now we're at 18.5%. All in a bid to bring down a stubbornly high inflation. But we got that inflation data for April, which showed that it came at 22.22%. So with all the interest rate raises, we're still seeing, stubbornly high inflation right here in Nigeria. We're seeing other economies, starting to slow, somehow. We've seen the UK, they've finally entered single digits, after being in double digits inflation for a while. So it shows that, the central banks are battling, and that battle, seems to be working. The CBN governor did explain yesterday that if not for the rate hikes, the previous rate hikes, inflation for April would have been at 30%. That's what their research team actually, found out. So at the end of the day, it's another hike, but not as aggressive as the 150 basis points hikes that we had before. So it shows that, central bankers are beginning to feel a little bit comfortable, with inflation at this time, and, are dialing back on raising rates. But it still remains to be seen what happens next, going forward. The war is still on, and everyone is hoping that at some point the war is going to end, but there is still that fear that, things might still escalate, and the little slower inflation we're seeing might, get more aggressive at some point. We still have that debt ceiling negotiation in the U.S. June 1st is around the corner. Everyone's hoping that they reach an agreement soon, but there are fears there at this point.
Saudis have been speaking to Ukrainians, part of mediation, see what they can do. But for the United Arab Emirates, becoming a key trade hub for Russian gold, how is that happening? Yeah, so at the end of the day, that's what we're seeing. The G7 leaders there, the last summit, they've been scratching their heads, seeing how they can stop Russia from actually getting proceeds from their exports. With all of the sanctions, somehow they're still able to find some countries to help them carry out, some of these exports. And one of these countries is actually the UAE. And we know Russia, they are a big exporter and producer of gold, at this time. And
the sanctions have affected their gold exports, but they found a way to, pass that through the United Arab Emirates. They did export about 15.6 tons, valued at $863 million between February 2022 and just March here. So that's a lot of gold that's
passed through. So the Russians are finding ways to take care of their diamond, take care of their
gold and all their precious exports, at this time, even though the sanctions are biting, but somehow they're finding ways to get their exports out. That's why we see the G7 summit, they were looking for ways to put some kind of origin on most of these commodities so that they know when the commodity is actually from Russia, so they can actually, ban it. But that's a tough one, because even with oil, how do you know? Because you have different refinery getting oil from different countries. How do you know which one, is coming from Russia?
There's also third-party importation, where countries are being accused of who are allies of Russia, of importing goods
and selling back
and selling it to Russia,
to other countries. So it is quite a tough one. A tough one, I must say. But the sanctions are biting, but they might need to ramp up more, to make sure Russia's not able to fund this war any further.
Finally, how are the markets looking?
So the markets are looking quite red today. We're seeing sell-offs at this point. In the U.S., we're seeing the U.S. futures, the Dow Jones Industrial Futures, that's down about 0.28%. Just the NASDAQ and the Dow futures in the green. In Europe, we're seeing red across board, and it's all on this U.S. Debt ceiling negotiations. Investors are getting quite jittery at this point. What's going to happen next? And we see Fitch Ratings there putting their foreign currency issuer default rating on negative watch at this time, all because of the risk of the U.S. missing out on some of those payments that are due June 1st. So all eyes on June 1st at this point.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Laddie.
Thank you.
Laddie Williams. Finally, on the program, the massive U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R Ford, sails into Norway to hold NATO exercises with the Norwegian armed forces along the country's coast. The ship is the world's largest aircraft carrier, and the exercises due to start in the coming days are a show of force for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization at a time of heightened tension between the military alliance made up of 31 countries from Europe and North America and Russia over the war in Ukraine. Now, the Norwegians lined up on the shore in Nesodden to watch the carrier sail past the Oslo fjord towards its moorings in Norway's capital, Oslo. Norwegian media reported the USS Gerald R Ford will be sailing north of the Arctic Circle. The Russian embassy in Oslo criticized the visit, saying there are no questions in the north that require a military solution, nor topics where outside intervention is needed. NATO member Norway shares up. Join us again tomorrow.